What's going down, beautiful people? Today we're taking a look at the history of World War II through political cartoons, so let's get it going. So y'all know there's a rise of all these totalitarian regimes, and each of them has their own expansionist foreign policy in Europe and in other places. And really this expansion is not really seriously opposed by the rest of the countries of Europe. For instance, when he remilitarizes the Rhineland, which was not supposed to be remilitarized under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And the big moment really goes down in September of 1938 when Hitler demands the Sudetenland, a piece of Czechoslovakia, and the leaders of England and France, hoping to avoid another world war, allow Hitler to take over the Sudetenland unopposed. And basically this Munich conference, this Munich agreement, forever becomes associated with this idea of appeasement because it ain't gonna work. In fact, not too long after the Munich agreement, in March of 1939, Hitler takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia, and so appeasement was failing. You know, and it's not just in Europe where this threat is growing, it's also in Japan. You know, when Japan invades Manchuria in 1931, this threatens the U.S. open door policy in China, and really they're going to continually violate different agreements, not only with the League of Nations, and Japan is increasingly expansionist throughout not only China but also Southeast Asia. Now things start to really heat up when Germany and the Soviet Union, kind of a creepy image right here to say the least, sign a secret non-aggression pact in August of 1939. And this is going to be a shock to many because communism and fascism, they don't like each other, but yet they had this mutual interest. And that mutual interest is they secretly agreed to divide up Poland. And this allows Hitler to attack Poland without the threat of a two-front war, worrying about the Soviets and also France and England. And on September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. And basically at this point, England and France had pledged to defend Poland, and boom, we got ourselves a sequel to the First World War. Now, in terms of the United States, Roosevelt, just like Wilson during World War I, sought to keep the United States out of World War II. But Roosevelt is deeply concerned about a potential Axis power victory. Many Americans, in fact, are concerned about the rise of fascism and totalitarianism, but there was a really strong isolationist sentiment in the country. Now, unfortunately, with the U.S. on the sidelines and the Soviets with the non-aggression pact, Hitler is able to quickly run through most of Europe. By June of 1940, most of France is defeated, and the only country really left to take on the Axis powers was in fact England. And Hitler's primary objective was to try to force Britain to surrender, and that's when you get the Battle of Britain. Meanwhile, the United States, especially groups like the America First Committee, here you could see a political cartoon where Dr. Seuss is very critical of this isolationist policy, this idea that, hey, we're going to be all fine because Hitler's going to get really tired once he's done, taking over all of Europe. Dr. Seuss and even Roosevelt felt that this was rather naive, and Roosevelt felt that Britain's security is very much tied together with our own, and wanted to do more to help the Allies, but could not because of those Neutrality Acts. Nevertheless, Roosevelt is very committed to trying to revise the Neutrality Acts so that he and his administration could help out, and there is deep divisions and debates over helping the Allies and also trying to avoid another World War I mistake. And one of the important stories of World War II is our slow kind of increasing involvement into the conflict. And by early 1941, the cash and carry provision was ended, and you have the Lend-Lease Act. So we're basically going to lend England and other allied powers the weapons of war so that they can do the fighting and the fight won't come to American shores. The other thing that develops is, a lot of these Lend-Lease supplies, another Dr. Seuss cartoon here, is that they're getting sunk by German U-boats, and not a lot of them are actually getting to their intended destination. And so that's when you get another amendment to neutrality with the Allied convoy system, where the U.S. is basically escorting Lend-Lease supplies across the Atlantic Ocean. In the midst of all this, FDR and Churchill secretly met and agreed upon the Atlantic Charter, which would serve as a vision for the post-war world that would keep the peace. Many Americans, Roosevelt included, viewed the war as a fight for the survival of freedom and democracy against fascism and militarist ideologies. So the Atlantic Charter kind of serves as the principles in which this war will eventually be fought. Now, it's none of the stuff in Europe that really gets us into World War II. It is going to be the actions of Japan and the conflict in Asia that's going to draw us into this. And ultimately, on December 7th, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor went down, killing over 2,400 Americans. The result of Pearl Harbor is pretty immediate. On December 8th, Congress acted by declaring war with only one dissenting vote in Congress. All that this Japanese attack did was wake up the United States from its isolationist nap. With this isolationist sentiment gone following Pearl Harbor, the United States is now even more so mobilizing for the war. We are already doing that with Lend-Lease, but now we are in the war, engaged not only against Japan, but also Germany and Italy, and we're ready to do this. You know, a very important thing to understand about World War II is the mass mobilization of American society not only helped end the Great Depression in the United States, but it's really American industrial output that is a huge factor in the eventual Allied victory. Now, Hitler makes a big mistake in June of 1941 when he launches Operation Barbarossa. Hitler decides to back out of his non-aggression pact with Stalin, and he invades the Soviet Union. And what this does is it brings the Soviet Union into the bed with the Allies. And I just want to point out, we've seen now Stalin in a wedding dress and getting in bed with England and Uncle Sam. So this video is about to get real weird, I think. This invasion does take place in June of 1941, so that's before Pearl Harbor. But once we get into the war, now we are allies with the Soviet Union. And this is going to get a little awkward because, you know, the United States didn't recognize the Soviet Union for nearly 16 years. And there's the whole beef between communism and capitalism. But you all know the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the U.S. and the Allies are going to really need each other, and they're going to achieve military victory through this Allied cooperation. And you're going to see propaganda like this that's going to try to convince the American people that the Soviets are our homies. But spoiler alert, this ain't the start of no Three Amigo gang. FDR, Stalin, and Churchill, while important for the war effort, they're not going to get along when everything's said and done. Pretty much 1942, early 1942 was the peak of German power. A big reason why it starts to go downhill, the invasion of Russia turns out to be disastrous. Now, a real pivotal moment of the war is the Soviet victory at Stalingrad by early 1943. This was tremendously important. The Soviets are pushing the Germans out of the Soviet Union, which is always important, ladies and gentlemen, to know your history, kiddos. Don't invade the Soviet Union like Napoleon learned and Hitler's going to learn. And if you do it before winter and make sure you win before winter. And if you're going to do it, bring a coat and maybe some Hot Pockets or something, because it's going to be a long fight. This cartoon really kind of shows another turning point in the war as England and the United States both preparing for what will be the other turning point in the war. The cross-channel invasion was the opening of the Second Front, which will happen on June 6, 1944. This is a massive Second Front. They're going to take on the Nazis and the Atlantic Wall and try to liberate the western part of Europe. Canadian forces were a part of the D-Day invasion as well, and all the troops were under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the successful invasion at D-Day is another kind of nail in the coffin of Hitler, because once we liberate France, you have the British, the Americans, the Canadians, and all the other Allied powers moving in towards Germany as the Soviets are moving in from the Eastern Front. And by May of 1945, Germany finally surrenders. Now, the war was going on at the same time over in Asia. An important battle that takes place in the war against Japan is the Battle of Midway. And in June of 1942, the reason why Midway is important, roughly 6 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, we stopped the Japanese offensive. They are no longer kind of expanding. We hold our ground at Midway. Now, the U.S. policy in the war against Japan was an island hopping strategy where the U.S. would strategically win control over territory in the hopes of getting closer to the mainland of Japan. But these battles on places like Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Guadalcanal, lots of American casualties, brutal fighting to try to accomplish the goal, which leads us to kind of the end. You know, there was this top secret project known as the Manhattan Project, which had begun in 1942. This employed over 100,000 people, spent $2 billion. And in order to end the war quickly and avoid this American invasion of the mainland of Japan, the United States, President Truman decides to drop the bomb. While the dropping of the bomb did end the war, this did lead to debates over the morality of using the bomb. bomb. And to this day, some people question the humanity and morality of using a weapon of this magnitude. Thanks for watching. Check out the website apushexplained.com for all sorts of history content. And make sure you subscribe. Have a beautiful day. Peace.